Okay, so today we're diving into a topic that I think is so crucial, and honestly, where I think we often fall short. We're talking about the experiences of autistic girls of color, specifically those who are, as they say, high masking.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, high masking. For our listeners, it really refers to how autistic individuals, and we see this a lot with girls of color, learn to kind of, hide their autistic traits. They blend in, but often at a huge personal cost.
And the article we're looking at today frames this perfectly. It says that for these girls, survival itself becomes the barrier to being seen.
Right. It's powerful stuff. We're really going to be looking at how the very strategies these girls develop, to just navigate a world that isn't always that welcoming can actually end up preventing them from getting the support they need. And that's really what the source material digs into, the lived realities and the systemic issues at play.
Exactly. And for everyone listening, our mission today is to really understand why these girls are so often missed. What are the consequences of this invisibility, both for them personally and for how we as a society understand neurodiversity and, well, what we even consider to be impairment.
That's the key word there,
Okay,
impairment.
so that is.
And the article jumps right into it because that's really a central challenge in all this, right? The diagnostic process.
Right.
So it points out that our big diagnostic manuals, the DSM-5-TR and the ICD-11, they have this really, slippery definition of impairment.
It is super vague,
It
right?
is. There's no clear standard, no universally agreed upon way to measure it. So it becomes a matter of interpretation, which, and this is important, citing Hollingdale and their colleagues here, is
Oh,
just ripe for bias.
okay, so let's unpack this a bit because there's no clear definition. It's all up for grabs, right? And that's where these biases creep in.
Exactly. It becomes about individual interpretations.
Hmm.
And the author argues that when clinicians and schools are left to interpret this vague concept through their own lenses, which, let's face it, are often influenced by societal expectations around gender, race, and class, well, you're not getting objective assessments.
No, you're getting gatekeeping.
Exactly, gatekeeping.
Yeah.
A way to deny diagnoses based on these really complex and often invisible factors. And, the author's own experience with this, being told they were too articulate or too functional to be autistic, is really telling. It's as if being able to explain your struggle somehow makes it less valid.
Oh, it's so frustrating, isn't it? You're penalized for being able to communicate your own experience. And the article also talks about how the shift to virtual assessments, with the pandemic and all, has made this even harder.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. So much of what we might consider subtle signs of distress, the effort of masking, it can be easily missed on a video call.
Yeah, you're not seeing the whole picture, are you?
You're not. You don't see the little movements, the need to avoid eye contact, the exhaustion after a seemingly normal interaction. So if a child can manage to smile and answer questions on a screen, they might be perceived as doing just fine, even if they are internally just, falling apart. And the article highlights this beautifully. Behind a screen, no one sees the leg bouncing under the desk or the meltdown that comes after.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It all comes down to this emphasis on external presentation. And this brings us to another important point the article raises, which is the conditioning that these girls often experience, particularly in schools.
Yes, this is crucial. The author talks about how the school environment, especially in underfunded schools, can actually condition girls of color to be quiet, compliant, to not make a fuss.
It's not even always intentional, right?
Right. It's often not about malice, but just the reality of managing large classrooms with limited resources. In that context, the quiet student, the one who doesn't need extra help, is often seen as the ideal.
And so these girls learn that their value, their worth, lies in being invisible, in not causing any problems.
Sadly, yes. And then the real kicker is that when these girls get really good at masking, at appearing to cope, the absence of visible impairment is then used to deny them a
Oh,
diagnosis.
looks like a terrible loop.
It is. It's a closed loop.
Yeah.
The survival strategy becomes the reason for exclusion.
So they learn to mask, to fit in, to survive, but that very masking then prevents the system from recognizing their guts.
Well,
And the article goes deeper into this masking phenomenon. How does it show up in these girls?
Well, the author describes these girls as often being very articulate, polite, good at hiding any outward signs of distress. They might even get good grades, but that could be for so many reasons, right?
Like what?
It could be their own internal drive, having a supportive teacher who's giving them extra help, or even, framer responses where they've learned to just blend in and avoid attention.
And I think the article also makes a great point about the insights we get from talking to mothers.
Oh, the mothers, yes. They see a completely different side of their daughters at home, a side that the school never sees. The meltdowns, the struggles with eating, the feeling of being different, of not belonging.
And yet, so often, the school's perspective, based purely on behavior and grades, overrides these incredibly important observations for the people who know these girls best.
It's a real disconnect, and we can't forget about the pressure to get a high school diploma.
Oh, right, that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
It does. For so many families, especially marginalized families, a diploma is seen as essential, right? A way to get ahead.
Right, to have opportunities.
Exactly. So while a diagnosis might open doors to support, getting that diagnosis might require showcasing struggles, which goes against the whole goal of graduating.
So you're almost forced to choose, right?
You are. Do you prioritize the diploma or the support? It's a tough situation for families to be in.
And this leads us to something the author talks about, their own personal experience with seeking different kinds of care. They compare their experience getting gender-affirming care versus trying to get and maintain an autism diagnosis.
Yeah, that was really powerful. They talk about how, with gender-affirming care, they were met with compassion, with the belief in their self-knowledge. It was all about affirmation and respect. But with the autism diagnosis, it felt like a constant battle, a constant need to prove and defend their experience, even years later.
The example they give about needing a full reevaluation just to get an updated accommodations letter for a course, that was so striking. It shows how fragile the system can be.
It does. The fact that they were told they might lose their diagnosis because they had learned to cope better, it's mind-boggling. It's as if the system wants you to stay stuck in your struggles.
And this really mirrors what happens in schools a lot, doesn't it?
It does. If a student isn't disrupting the class, if they're not visibly melting down, they're often seen as fine, regardless of their internal struggles.
No news is good news.
Right, and that's so dangerous. The system just doesn't seem to have the capacity to recognize the quiet pain, the silent struggles that these girls are experiencing. If they're compliant, if they're smiling, if they're speaking in full sentences, they must be neurotypical, right?
Wrong. It's heartbreaking.
Mm.
And then the article moves on to these systemic biases that make everything even harder, especially when it comes to navigating support systems like the regional center in LA County.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other beast. The author describes the regional center as this huge, confusing bureaucracy. It's hard to find your way around, even if you know what you're looking for.
It sounds overwhelming.
It is. There's this assumption that families already know how the system works, that they understand the language, that they have the resources to even find the right people and offices.
And that's just not the case for so many families, is it?
No, not at all, especially marginalized families. The author really highlights the crucial role of community advocates and cultural liaisons who help bridge this gap. They're the unsung heroes in all of this, helping families navigate this confusing system. And then even when you do get an assessment, there's the issue of remote evaluations.
Right, we talked about that earlier. So much can get missed.
So much. Those subtle cues that might be crucial to understanding someone's experience, they just don't translate through a screen.
And then there's the whole issue of cultural bias and how behaviors are interpreted.
Oh, this is huge. The same behavior can be seen completely differently depending on who's exhibiting it. What might be flagged as a concern in a white child might be dismissed as just cultural in a black or brown child.
And that's so dangerous, right? It can lead to misdiagnosis, to a lack of understanding.
Absolutely. And then you add in the perspective of schools, especially underfunded schools. They might be reluctant to do these in-depth evaluations, especially if the child is passing their classes.
Because it's expensive.
Right. There's a cost associated with those evaluations and then with providing support services. So the attitude can become, well, if they're not failing, why bother?
It's as if the system demands proof of impairment, but then makes it so hard to actually get that proof.
It's a real catch-22. And the article also points out this critical gap between evaluation and actual support.
Oh, right. The author makes this important distinction, doesn't they?
They do. So getting an evaluation through the regional center doesn't automatically mean you get an autism diagnosis, at least not one that schools are required to recognize.
So a family can go through all that, and the school can just say no.
Basically, yes. They can say the evidence isn't strong enough and keep the student under a more general disability category, which means fewer protections and less specific support.
It's like they're constantly being told to jump through hoops, but the hoops keep moving.
It's exhausting even just thinking about it. And for so many families, they never even get to the regional center in the first place because of all the barriers we've talked about.
So the system demands proof, but makes it nearly impossible to obtain. So what happens then? What are the consequences for these girls when they're missed by these systems?
The consequences are huge. They miss out on critical services like IEPs, speech therapy, sensory support, counseling. They also miss out on connecting with the autistic community, finding a language to understand their experiences, the reassurance that they're not alone.
And I imagine on a personal level, it's devastating.
It is. They internalize their struggles. They blame themselves for feeling tired, overwhelmed, different. They think they're lazy, immature, flawed. And this can lead to serious burnout later on, affecting their ability to work, to have relationships, to just function in the world.
And the author makes such a good point about early intervention. What's the point of early intervention if the system can't even recognize the need in the first place?
Exactly. You can't intervene if you don't see the problem. And these girls, they lose precious years of belonging, of self-knowledge, of building a life based on who they truly are, not who they think they need to be to survive.
It's like they're forced to build their lives on a foundation of adaptation, not authenticity.
Exactly. And that's what leads the author to this call for a total rethinking of our diagnostic frameworks. They say we need to move away from this narrow focus on impairment, on deficits and distress, and see autism as a way of being, not a disorder.
They talk about the power threat meaning framework, the PTMF, as a possible alternative.
Yes. The PTMF is all about asking different questions. Instead of what's wrong with you, it asks, what has happened to you? How have you made sense of it? And what do you need to survive and thrive?
It's about understanding the whole person, right?
It is. It
Oh.
sees the individual as the expert on their own life and tries to understand their experiences in context.
So instead of labeling and pathologizing, it's about listening and understanding.
Exactly. And the author argues that a truly just system, a system that truly supports autistic individuals, would need to adopt this kind of approach. It would see masking as a sign of strength, a sign of resilience, and a clear indicator of a need for support.
And this isn't just about inclusion for the sake of inclusion, right?
No, it's about creating a system where survival doesn't become a barrier to getting help. It's about recognizing that the quiet struggles, the internal battles, are just as valid as the ones that are loud and disruptive.
So the big takeaway here is that our current system often fails these girls because it's looking for the wrong things. It's misinterpreting their coping mechanisms as signs that they're fine, when in reality they're often drowning, just silently.
It's tragic, really. The system demands to see the struggle, but these girls have learned to hide it so well to survive. And then that very act of survival becomes the reason they're denied help.
It's such a powerful indictment of how we think about and approach neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And really makes you think, as the author asks, if we only recognize trauma when it's loud, who are we leaving behind in the quiet?
That's the question we need to grapple with. What would a system look like that truly saw everyone, regardless of how well they've learned to blend in, to mask, to survive?
That's something for all of us to think about. Thank you so much for breaking this down with me. And thank you to everyone listening for taking this deep dive with us. I hope this has given you all some food for thought and some new ways to think about neurodiversity and the systems that are supposed to support it.
It's been a pleasure. Really important conversation to have.
It really is.